The sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Silver Creek Station, as Abigail Porter clutched her ticket in trembling fingers, watching the massive iron beast of a locomotive huff and puff its way toward her future, and away from everything she'd ever known. The year was 1876, and the promise of a teaching position in San Francisco had drawn her from the only home she'd ever known in this small Colorado town. But fate, it seemed, had other plans entirely. Last call for westbound passengers. The conductor shouted, his voice carrying over the hiss of steam and the murmur of travelers. Abigail adjusted her carpetbag and straightened her spine. 22 years old and unmarried, she had surprised everyone with her decision to leave. Her parents had protested, of course, but the telegram offering her the position at a prestigious girls' school had been like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. After Jonathan's betrayal, after finding her fiancé in the arms of the banker's daughter just 2 weeks before their wedding, the thought of remaining in Silver Creek had become unbearable. She took a step toward the train, and then another. Women didn't just travel across the country alone. Women didn't just abandon their families to chase wild dreams. But Abigail Porter had always been different. The heavy weight of stairs bore into her back as she approached the steps leading up to the passenger car. Mrs. Pembroke would be clucking her tongue. Old Mr. Sullivan would be shaking his head in disapproval. And her mother, her dear mother, would be crying quiet tears into her handkerchief at home, unable to watch her only daughter leave. "Ticket, miss?" the conductor asked, extending his gloved hand. Abigail opened her mouth to respond when a voice cut through the station noise like a knife through butter. "Abigail, wait!" She turned, heart leaping traitorously in her chest, half expecting to see Jonathan rushing toward her with some desperate explanation. Instead, she saw Vaughn Blackwood, his tall frame moving purposefully through the crowd, Stetson clutched in one hand. The notorious cowboy, the one whose very name had mothers warning their daughters to keep their distance. The one who'd arrived in Silver Creek 3 years ago with nothing but his horse, his gun, and mysteries trailing behind him like dust. The one who now owned the most successful cattle operation in the county. The one who inexplicably was now standing before her, breathing hard, his dark eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Don't go," he said simply, reaching for her hand. The conductor cleared his throat impatiently. "Miss, the train's leaving." But Vaughn Blackwood's warm, calloused fingers had closed around hers, and something in his gaze, something urgent and honest and vulnerable, held her in place. "Why?" she whispered, aware of the spectacle they were creating, aware of the gossip that would spread through town like wildfire. "Because I need to talk to you," he replied, his voice low, meant only for her ears. "Because you're making a mistake." The whistle blew, shrill and insistent. The conductor shook his head and boarded the train. The massive wheels began to turn, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Abigail stood frozen, the ticket still clutched in her hand, her future rolling away without her as Vaughn Blackwood's fingers remained firmly entwined with hers. "You missed your train," he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "You made me miss my train," she corrected, pulling her hand away and turning to face him fully. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I had a position waiting for me. A new life. A life you were running toward because you're running away," he said bluntly. "That's never a good reason to leave somewhere, Abigail." Her cheeks flushed hot with indignation. "You don't know the first thing about my reasons." "I know about Jonathan Wright," he replied, and the name alone was enough to make her flinch. "The whole town knows. But running 3 states away won't fix what he broke." Abigail clutched her carpetbag tighter, fighting the urge to burst into tears on the platform. "I have nothing left for me here." Vaughn's expression softened. "That's where you're wrong." He gestured toward the station exit. "Walk with me." "Please." If you still want to leave after we talk, I'll personally pay for your ticket on tomorrow's train. She should refuse. She should march straight to the telegrapher's office and send word to San Francisco that she'd been delayed. She should maintain every shred of propriety that her upbringing had instilled in her. Instead, she found herself nodding. 1 hour, she said firmly. You have 1 hour of my time, Mr. Blackwood. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to devastating. That's more than I hoped for. He offered his arm. And please call me Vaughn. As they walked away from the station, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. The main street of Silver Creek was bustling with midday activity as Vaughn led Abigail toward the Silver Spur Cafe. She was acutely aware of the stares following them, the town's most notorious bachelor walking arm in arm with the jilted schoolteacher. Perhaps this isn't the best idea, she murmured, attempting to create more space between them. People will talk. Vaughn's laugh was low and warm. People always talk, Miss Porter. Might as well give them something worth discussing. The cafe was mercifully half empty when they entered, though Mrs. Holloway behind the counter didn't bother to hide her surprise when she saw them together. Vaughn led Abigail to a table near the window and pulled out her chair with unexpected gallantry. Coffee? He asked once they were seated. Yes, thank you, she replied, setting her carpetbag by her feet and removing her gloves. She was still trying to make sense of this bizarre turn of events. Mr. Blackwood Vaughn, he corrected. Vaughn, she conceded. You still haven't explained why you stopped me from boarding that train. His dark eyes studied her face for a long moment before he signaled to Mrs. Holloway for coffee. Did you know that when you first arrived in Silver Creek to teach at our school, every unmarried man in the county suddenly developed an interest in learning? Abigail blinked in surprise. What? It's true, he continued, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Even I considered signing up for evening classes, though I figured at 30 I was probably past the age for schooling. Mrs. Holloway approached with 2 cups of coffee, her curiosity practically radiating from her as she set them down. Anything else I can get you too? We're fine, thank you, Martha. Vaughn replied with a polite nod that nonetheless made it clear they wanted privacy. Once the woman had retreated, Abigail leaned forward. You're avoiding my question. No, I'm building toward answering it, he countered. You see, for 2 years I've watched you in this town, teaching the children with more patience than a saint, helping Mrs. Jenkins with her reading at the church socials, standing up to the town council when they tried to cut the school budget. A flush crept up Abigail's neck. You've been watching me. Hard not to, he admitted. You shine brighter than anyone else in this dusty little town. The compliment struck her speechless for a moment. She'd always considered herself plain and unremarkable, especially standing next to the vivacious girls who seemed to catch every man's eye at dances and socials. And then that fool Jonathan Wright came along, Vaughn continued, his voice hardening. Asked for your hand after knowing you all of 3 months. 6, she corrected automatically, then bit her lip. Vaughn shook his head. And when he showed his true colors, the whole town watched you carry on with your head held high, never letting on how much he'd hurt you. He took a sip of his coffee. Until you decided to run away. Anger flared in Abigail's chest. I am not running away. I received a legitimate offer for a position that pays twice what I make here, at a school with actual resources. She leaned forward. You know what it's like trying to teach 30 children of different ages with just 5 textbooks between them. Having to fight the town council every year for basic supplies. I do know, Vaughn replied calmly, because I was at that council meeting last month when you stood up and shamed them into increasing the school budget for next year. She sat back, surprised. You were there. I own the largest ranch in the county now. My taxes pay for a good portion of that school. His lips quirked into a half-smile. "I wanted to see where my money was going. Turned out it was going to a cause far worthier than I'd imagined." Abigail's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "None of this explains why you stopped me from getting on that train." Vaughn's expression grew serious. "Because Silver Creek needs you, Abigail. The children need you." He paused, and something in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. "And maybe I need you too." Before she could respond to this startling declaration, the cafe door burst open, and Jonathan Wright himself stumbled in, clearly well into his cups despite the early hour. "There you are," he slurred, pointing at Abigail. "Heard you were leaving town. Running away cause you can't stand to see me with Caroline." Abigail stiffened, mortification washing over her. Of all the moments for Jonathan to appear, drunk and belligerent. But before she could respond, Vaughn was on his feet, his tall frame imposing as he placed himself between Abigail and her former fiancé. "Right," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "You're making a scene in front of a lady. I suggest you leave." Jonathan squinted up at the taller man. "This ain't your business, Blackwood. This is between me and my—" "Finish that sentence and you'll regret it," Vaughn interrupted, steel beneath his calm tone. "Miss Porter isn't your anything. You made sure of that when you decided the banker's daughter was a better prospect." The cafe had gone silent, every eye on the confrontation. Abigail wanted to sink through the floor in humiliation. This was exactly why she needed to leave Silver Creek, to escape these moments where her heartbreak was public spectacle. Jonathan swayed on his feet, his face flushing with anger. "You think you're better than me, don't you? The big rancher swooping in to rescue the poor jilted schoolteacher." He laughed bitterly. "Well, she's damaged goods now. I made sure of that." The words hit Abigail like a physical blow. She gasped, tears springing to her eyes despite her determination not to cry. Vaughn moved so quickly she barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside the table. The next he had Jonathan by the collar, half lifting him off his feet. "Apologize to the lady," he growled, "or I'll drag you outside and teach you some manners the hard way." Jonathan's eyes widened with fear as his feet scrambled for purchase. I'm sorry," he choked out. "Not good enough." Vaughn's grip tightened. "Miss Porter is a lady of impeccable character and grace. You, on the other hand, are a disgrace to the name gentleman. Now apologize properly, or so help me God, I apologize, Miss Porter," Jonathan gasped out. "My words were unforgivable." Vaughn released him with a slight shove, causing Jonathan to stumble backward. "Now get out, and if I ever hear you speaking about Miss Porter in anything but the most respectful terms, you'll answer to me. Understood?" Jonathan nodded frantically and bolted from the cafe, the door swinging wildly behind him. In the silence that followed, Abigail became painfully aware of the spectacle they'd created. Mrs. Holloway and the few other patrons were staring openly. This would be all over town by supper time. Without a word, she gathered her belongings and rushed from the cafe, tears blurring her vision as she pushed through the door into the bright sunlight. "Abigail, wait," Vaughn called, quickly following her. She kept walking, mortification and anger fueling her steps. "You've had your hour, Mr. Blackwood, and you've succeeded admirably in ensuring I have no reputation left to salvage in this town." He caught up to her easily, his long stride matching hers. "That wasn't my intention." "What was your intention?" she demanded, stopping abruptly to face him. "To humiliate me further. To remind everyone in town of my foolishness in trusting Jonathan. To protect you," he interrupted, his voice gentle. "Because you deserve protecting, Abigail. You deserve so much more than what this town has given you." The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Then why stop me from leaving?" "Because running away isn't the answer," he said simply. "And because I hope there might be something here worth staying for." The way he looked at her made her heart flutter traitorously in her chest. "I don't understand." Vaughn took a deep breath. I've admired you from afar for 2 years, Abigail. I've watched how you care for this town's children, how you stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. I wanted to court you properly, but then Jonathan swooped in with his fancy words and promises. She stared at him, stunned by the revelation. You wanted to court me, but you never said a word. A rueful smile crossed his face. I'm a man of action more than words, and I figured a refined lady like yourself wouldn't want anything to do with a rough cowboy like me. You own half the county now, she pointed out. You're hardly just a rough cowboy. At heart, that's all I'll ever be. He reached for her hand again, his touch sending a jolt through her. Abigail, I'm asking for a chance. A chance to show you that there's still a place for you here in Silver Creek. A chance to prove that not all men are like Jonathan Wright. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable, but doubt still clouded Abigail's mind. The school in San Francisco is expecting me. They'll have turned away other candidates by now. Then let me make you a counter-offer, Vaughn said, an idea clearly forming. My ranch has 15 children living on it, hands kids with no proper schooling. I've been meaning to build a schoolhouse, hire a teacher. His eyes held hers steadily. Let me build you a school, Abigail, a proper one with all the books and supplies you need. Her lips parted in surprise. You would do that, in a heartbeat, he replied without hesitation. Say you'll at least consider it. Give me 1 month. If you still want to leave after that, I won't stand in your way. I'll even escort you to San Francisco myself if need be. 1 month. It seemed both an eternity and no time at all. The rational part of her knew she should refuse, should send a telegram to San Francisco immediately explaining her delay. But another part apart, she'd thought, Jonathan had killed fluttered to life at the earnestness in Vaughn Blackwood's gaze. 1 month, she finally agreed. But I make no promises beyond that. The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. That's all I ask. He offered his arm again. Now may I escort you home? I suspect your mother will be surprised to see you. As they walked toward the modest house where Abigail had grown up, she couldn't help wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or if, perhaps, missing that train had been the best thing that could have happened to her. The Porter family home sat on the edge of town, a modest 2-story structure with a welcoming front porch and her mother's prized roses climbing trellises along the front. As they approached, Abigail's steps slowed. Her parents hadn't expected to see her again for months, possibly years. What would they think of her sudden return and in the company of Vaughn Blackwood, no less, having second thoughts? Vaughn asked softly, noting her hesitation. My mother will have questions, Abigail replied. Many questions. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. And I suspect most of them will be about me. Despite her nervousness, Abigail couldn't help returning his smile. You have a certain reputation in town, Mr. Blackwood. Oh, we're back to Mr. Blackwood now, he teased. And what reputation might that be? A mysterious loner. A man with a past he doesn't speak of. A businessman ruthless enough to buy out half the ranches in the county in just 3 years. She gave him a sidelong glance. Not exactly the type of man mothers want calling on their daughters. Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain, quickly masked. All reputations have some truth and some fiction to them, he said carefully. I hope to show you which is which. Before Abigail could respond, the front door flew open and her mother rushed onto the porch, her face a picture of shock and confusion. Abigail Elizabeth Porter, what on earth? Her gaze shifted to Vaughn and her expression grew even more bewildered. Mr. Blackwood. Hello, Mrs. Porter, Vaughn said, removing his hat respectfully. I've brought your daughter home. But the train, Mrs. Porter began. I missed it, Abigail interrupted, climbing the porch steps. Or rather, I was, persuaded to reconsider my departure. Her mother's sharp eyes darted between them, clearly calculating the implications. I see, she said, though it was obvious she didn't see it all. Perhaps you'd better come inside. Both of you, she added with a gesture that included Vaughn. The interior of the Porter home was modest but comfortable, with well-worn furniture and carefully preserved family mementos. Mrs. Porter led them to the sitting room, where Abigail's father looked up from his newspaper with astonishment. "Abby, what in heaven's name, Mr. Blackwood convinced me to delay my journey, father," Abigail explained, setting her carpetbag down. Mr. Porter rose to his feet, extending a hand to Vaughn. "Did he now?" There was a hint of wariness in his tone. Like most in town, Harrison Porter knew of Vaughn Blackwood primarily by reputation. "Sir," Vaughn said, shaking the offered hand firmly, "I hope you'll forgive my interference, but I believe your daughter has more to offer Silver Creek than she realizes. And what exactly do you propose she do instead of taking that teaching position in San Francisco?" Mr. Porter asked bluntly. Vaughn didn't flinch under the older man's scrutiny. "I'm establishing a school on my ranch for the children of my workers. They deserve an education, and Miss Porter is the finest teacher this territory has ever seen." Abigail felt warmth spread through her at his praise, even as her father's eyebrows rose skeptically. "A ranch school," Mrs. Porter interjected, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. But Abigail was to teach at a prestigious ladies' academy. "Mother, I've only agreed to stay for 1 month," Abigail clarified, "to consider Mr. Blackwood's proposal." The unfortunate phrasing wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Mrs. Porter's eyes widened, Mr. Porter stiffened, and Vaughn cleared his throat awkwardly. "His business proposal," Abigail hastily amended, a blush staining her cheeks. "I assure you, my intentions are honorable," Vaughn added, which somehow only made the situation more uncomfortable. Mr. Porter's expression darkened. "After what happened with that Wright boy, you'll understand if we're protective of our daughter, Mr. Blackwood." "I would expect nothing less, sir," Vaughn replied with complete sincerity, "which is why I want to be transparent about my intentions from the start." He turned to face Abigail directly, his dark eyes serious. "Miss Porter, I admire you greatly. I believe you are not only the best teacher for the children on my ranch, but also a woman of exceptional character and courage. While my immediate offer is professional in nature, I would be less than honest if I didn't acknowledge that I hope, in time, you might consider me as someone worthy of your affection." The room fell silent. Abigail stared at him, heart hammering in her chest. She had never heard a man speak so directly, so honestly about his feelings, especially not in front of her parents. "Mr. Blackwood," her father finally said, breaking the tense silence, "you certainly don't mince words. Life's too short for mincing words, Mr. Porter," Vaughn replied, his gaze never leaving Abigail's face. "I've learned that the hard way." Something in his tone, a hint of old sorrow, made Abigail wonder again about the past he never discussed. Who had Vaughn Blackwood been before he arrived in Silver Creek? What had taught him the value of directness? Mrs. Porter cleared her throat. "Well, this is all very unexpected. Abigail, perhaps you should take your things upstairs while I prepare some tea." She gave her daughter a meaningful look that clearly said they would be having a private conversation very soon. Abigail nodded, grateful for the reprieve. "Yes, Mother." She turned to Vaughn. "Thank you for escorting me home, Mr. Blackwood." He placed his hat back on his head. "My pleasure, Miss Porter. May I call on you tomorrow to discuss the details of the school arrangement?" "Yes," she replied, surprising herself with how quickly the answer came. Tomorrow would be fine. A small smile played at his lips. "Until then." He nodded respectfully to her parents and took his leave, his tall figure cutting an impressive silhouette as he walked down the path toward the gate. The moment the door closed behind him, Mrs. Porter turned to her daughter with wide eyes. "Abigail Elizabeth Porter, you have some explaining to do." Mr. Porter settled back in his chair, looking equally bewildered. I think we'd all like to hear how you went from boarding a train to San Francisco to being courted by the most enigmatic man in the county." "He's not courting me," Abigail protested weakly, though Vaughn's words had certainly suggested otherwise. "He's offering me a teaching position. A teaching position that conveniently keeps you within calling distance," her father observed dryly. "The man may raise cattle, but he's no fool." Abigail sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "This morning, I was leaving Silver Creek forever. Now I've agreed to stay a month, and Vaughn Blackwood is declaring his intentions in our sitting room." Her mother sat beside her, taking her hand. "After Jonathan, I understand why you wanted to leave, but running away isn't always the answer, dear." "That's exactly what Vaughn said," Abigail murmured. "Vaughn, is it?" Her father noted with raised eyebrows. Abigail flushed. "Mr. Blackwood," she corrected. Mrs. Porter squeezed her hand. "I won't pretend I'm not pleased you're staying, even if only for a month. But are you certain about this arrangement? Vaughn Blackwood has a certain reputation. What do we really know about him?" Abigail asked softly, more to herself than to her parents. "He arrived 3 years ago, bought the old Hollister place, then gradually expanded until he owned the largest ranch in the county. He employs more men than any other outfit. He pays fair wages. He keeps to himself mostly." She looked up at her parents. "But beyond that, I realize I know very little about the man who just convinced me to completely change my plans." Her father folded his newspaper thoughtfully. "I've had some business dealings with Blackwood. He's fair, direct, and keeps his word. More than I can say for some men born and raised in these parts." He gave Abigail a significant look. "But a man with means who appears suddenly with no family connections and a reluctance to discuss his past. There are bound to be questions." "Perhaps it's time someone asked them," Abigail said, a new determination forming within her. If she was going to consider staying in Silver Creek, if she was going to consider Vaughn Blackwood as anything more than an employer, she needed answers. 1 month suddenly seemed like both an eternity and no time at all to uncover the mysteries surrounding the man who had taken her hand and said, "Don't go." The following morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of crisp autumn day that showcased Silver Creek at its finest. Abigail had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with missed trains and dark-eyed cowboys and schools built from nothing but promises. She dressed with particular care, selecting a blue dress that her mother had always said brought out the color of her eyes. As she pinned her hair up, she chided herself for the extra effort. This was to be a business meeting, nothing more. Yet Vaughn's words from the previous day echoed in her mind. "I hope in time you might consider me as someone worthy of your affection." Such directness was unnerving, and if she was honest with herself, refreshing after Jonathan's pretty lies and empty promises. Breakfast with her parents was a stilted affair. Her mother kept giving her meaningful glances, while her father hid behind his newspaper, occasionally peering over it to study his daughter with bewilderment, as if he couldn't quite believe she was still at the breakfast table and not halfway to California. "What time is Mr. Blackwood expected?" Mrs. Porter finally asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. 10 o'clock, Abigail replied, pushing her eggs around her plate. "He mentioned wanting to show me the site for the proposed schoolhouse." "Unchaperoned?" her mother asked with raised eyebrows. Abigail sighed. "Mother, I'm 22 years old and a schoolteacher. Besides, we'll be on his ranch with dozens of workers around." "Nevertheless," Mrs. Porter said firmly, "appearances matter, especially after yesterday's scene at the cafe." Abigail winced. Of course news of the confrontation with Jonathan had spread. "What exactly have you heard?" Her father lowered his newspaper. "That Vaughn Blackwood nearly throttled Jonathan right for speaking disrespectfully about you, then offered to build you a school if you'd stay in Silver Creek." He shook his head in amazement. "I must say, when you break your routine, Abby, you certainly don't do it halfway. Before Abigail could respond, a knock sounded at the front door. Her mother rose quickly. That will be him. Early, of course. Indeed, when Mrs. Porter returned to the dining room, Vaughn Blackwood followed behind her. He cut an impressive figure in a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and tailored trousers, clearly his town clothes rather than his usual ranching attire. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he carried his Stetson in his hands. "Good morning," he said, his eyes finding Abigail immediately. "I apologize for arriving before the appointed time." "Not at all," Mr. Porter said, folding his newspaper and standing to shake Vaughn's hand. "Join us for coffee." "Thank you, sir." Vaughn took the offered seat, which happened to be directly across from Abigail. His eyes lingered on her for a moment, appreciation evident in his gaze. "You look lovely this morning, Miss Porter." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Porter bustled about pouring coffee, her eyes missing nothing of the exchange between the two. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand you're planning to show Abigail your ranch today." "Yes, madam," he confirmed, accepting the cup she offered. "I thought Miss Porter should see where the schoolhouse would be built and meet some of the families whose children would be her students." "A sensible plan," Mrs. Porter agreed, "though perhaps it would be appropriate for someone to accompany you both, given the circumstances." Abigail closed her eyes briefly in mortification. "Mother, Mrs. Porter is absolutely right," Vaughn interrupted smoothly. "In fact, I had intended to extend the invitation to both of you as well. I would be honored to show you the entire operation." Abigail stared at him in surprise. Was he genuinely concerned with propriety, or was this a calculated move to win her parents' approval? Mr. Porter looked intrigued. "I've heard your breeding program has introduced some fine stock to the territory." "We've had some success with crossing Herefords with the traditional Longhorns," Vaughn acknowledged. "I'd be happy to show you the results." Mrs. Porter seemed satisfied with this arrangement. "Well, that sounds lovely. Harrison has been curious about your operation for some time." "Then it's settled," Vaughn said, his eyes finding Abigail's again with a hint of amusement. "The wagon is out front whenever you're all ready." An hour later, they were traveling along the road that led out of Silver Creek toward the sprawling Blackwood Ranch. Vaughn handled the team of horses with easy confidence, while Mr. Porter sat beside him on the driver's bench, already deep in conversation about cattle breeding and market prices. Abigail and her mother sat in the back of the wagon, which had been fitted with comfortable seats for the occasion. "He certainly came prepared," Mrs. Porter murmured, adjusting her bonnet against the sun. Abigail nodded, watching the back of Vaughn's broad shoulders as he guided the horses. "He seems to have thought of everything." "Men like Vaughn Blackwood usually do," her mother replied cryptically. The landscape gradually changed as they left town behind, the terrain opening up into vast grasslands dotted with stands of pine and aspen. In the distance, the foothills of the Rocky Mountains provided a dramatic backdrop. After about 40 minutes, they crested a rise, and the Blackwood Ranch spread out before them. Abigail couldn't suppress a gasp. She had known Vaughn's operation was substantial, but seeing it in person was another matter entirely. A large, two-story ranch house commanded a view of the valley, with numerous outbuildings arranged in a practical pattern around it. Corrals held horses and cattle, and in the distance, she could see the glint of sunlight on water, a creek running through the property. Several smaller cabins were clustered a short distance from the main house, presumably for the ranch hands and their families. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Vaughn glanced back at her, a smile touching his lips. "It's home," he said simply. As they approached, activity at the ranch became visible. Men on horseback moved among the cattle in the distance. A woman hung laundry outside one of the cabins. Several children were playing near a large oak tree. "Those would be some of your students," Vaughn told Abigail, nodding toward the children, ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Bright kids, all of them, but with no formal education beyond what their parents can provide in the evenings. The thought of those children without access to learning tugged at Abigail's heart. Teaching had never been just a job to her, it was a calling, a way to shape the future by guiding young minds. Vaughn guided the wagon to the front of the main house, where a middle-aged man with a weathered face emerged to greet them. "This is Miguel Vasquez, my foreman," Vaughn introduced as they disembarked. "Miguel, this is Mr. and Mrs. Porter and their daughter, Miss Abigail Porter." "The teacher," Miguel said with a nod and a warm smile. "My boys have been very excited since the boss told us you might be coming. They have many questions about books." Abigail returned his smile. "I'd be delighted to meet them." "All in good time," Vaughn said. "First, let me show you the site I've selected for the schoolhouse." He led them around the main house and up a gentle slope to a flat area overlooking the entire ranch. A small grove of aspen trees provided natural shade, and the view was spectacular in all directions. "Here," Vaughn said, gesturing to the clearing. "Large enough for a proper building with room to expand if needed, close enough to the main house and cabins for convenience, but separate enough to feel like its own place." He turned to Abigail. "What do you think?" She walked to the center of the clearing, trying to envision it a schoolhouse with large windows to let in the magnificent light, perhaps a small bell tower, benches under the aspens for outdoor lessons on fine days. Despite herself, she felt a flutter of excitement at the possibilities. "It's perfect," she admitted. "The children would have space to play, and the setting would inspire learning." Vaughn's smile was genuine, lighting his entire face. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "I had this drawn up last night." "Just preliminary ideas, of course." Abigail unfolded the paper to find a detailed sketch of a schoolhouse, far more substantial than she had imagined. The design showed a large main classroom, a smaller adjoining room that could serve as a library, and even modest living quarters. Living quarters. She questioned, looking up at him. "For the teacher," he explained. "I thought you might prefer to have your own space here at the ranch rather than traveling back and forth from town each day, especially in winter." Mrs. Porter peered over her daughter's shoulder at the plans. "This is quite extensive, Mr. Blackwood, and expensive, I would imagine." "An investment in the future, Mrs. Porter," Vaughn replied easily. "These children deserve the best education possible, and that means providing the best facilities for their teacher." Mr. Porter, who had been studying the site with a critical eye, nodded approvingly. "When would construction begin?" "Tomorrow, if Miss Porter agrees," Vaughn said, his eyes finding Abigail's. "I have the lumber already ordered and men ready to work. We could have the basic structure completed within 2 weeks." 2 weeks, Abigail echoed in disbelief. "That's impossible." Vaughn's smile turned slightly smug. "I don't believe in impossible, Miss Porter, not when something is important enough." The intensity of his gaze made her heart flutter traitorously. Was he still talking about the schoolhouse, or was there a deeper meaning to his words? "Come," he said, breaking the moment. "Let's meet your potential students." He led them back down the slope toward the cluster of cabins where they had seen the children playing. As they approached, a woman emerged from one of the cabins, wiping her hands on her apron. "Isabella," Vaughn called. "I'd like you to meet Miss Porter, the teacher I told you about." Isabella Vasquez, Miguel's wife as it turned out, greeted Abigail with an enthusiastic embrace that caught her by surprise. "Miss Porter, we have prayed for a teacher for our children. When the boss told us he might convince you to come, we were so happy." Before Abigail could respond, children began appearing from various directions, clearly having been watching for their arrival. They ranged in age just as Vaughn had described, from small ones barely old enough for schooling to teenagers on the cusp of adulthood. A boy of about 12 stepped forward, his dark eyes serious. "Are you really going to be our teacher, miss?" Abigail felt every eye on her, the children's hopeful gazes, her parents' curious ones, and Vaughn's steady, expectant look. She had promised him a month to consider his proposal, but standing here, seeing these eager faces, she felt her resolve to leave Silver Creek weakening already. "I'm considering it, yes," she replied carefully. "What's your name?" "David Vasquez, miss," the boy answered proudly. "I can already read some and do my sums up to multiplication. Papa taught me." Isabella beamed at her son. "David wants to be a doctor someday. Is that not wonderful? But he needs proper schooling." One by one, the other children introduced themselves, each sharing some small detail about their interests or abilities. Abigail found herself charmed by their earnestness and hungry minds. These were children who truly wanted to learn, who saw education as the gift it was rather than the burden many town children considered it. As the introductions continued, Abigail became aware of Vaughn watching her, a small smile playing at his lips. When she caught his eye, he gave her a look that seemed to say, "You see, this is why I couldn't let you get on that train." And for the first time since he'd taken her hand at the station platform, Abigail wondered if perhaps he'd been right to stop her. After the tour of the ranch and introductions to the families, Vaughn invited them to stay for lunch. Isabella and the other women had prepared a feast, clearly having anticipated the visit. The meal was served outdoors under a large oak tree, with tables brought from the various cabins and arranged in a long row. It was unlike any lunch Abigail had experienced in Silver Creek, where rigid social conventions dictated who sat where and what was discussed. Here, ranch hands and their families mingled freely. Conversation flowed in both English and Spanish, and children darted between the adults, their laughter a constant backdrop. Vaughn, she noticed, seemed completely at ease in this setting. He spoke Spanish with the Mexican workers, knew each person by name, and inquired about specific concerns with genuine interest. It was a side of him she hadn't expected, this easy camaraderie with people many would consider beneath their station. "You seem surprised," he commented quietly when he found a moment to sit beside her. "I am," Abigail admitted. "This isn't what I expected." His eyebrow rose slightly. "What did you expect?" She hesitated, not wanting to offend him. "I suppose I expected more formality. More division between the owner and the workers." Vaughn considered this as he took a sip of coffee. "These people aren't just workers to me, Abigail. They're the heart of everything I've built here." His gaze swept over the gathering. "Miguel was the first man to believe in my vision for this place. His family has become like my own." "You have no family of your own." The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore," he said simply, and something in his tone made it clear the subject was closed. Before Abigail could apologize for her intrusion, David Vasquez approached them, clutching a worn book to his chest. "Miss Porter," he said hesitantly, Would you read some of this to us?" "Mama says you read more beautifully than anyone." Abigail smiled, touched by the request. "Of course, David." She accepted the book, a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe, and looked around at the expectant faces of the children who had gathered close upon seeing the book. "Perhaps under the oak tree," she suggested, and was immediately surrounded by children eager to lead her to the spot. As she settled against the trunk of the massive tree with children arranging themselves in a semicircle before her, Abigail caught sight of Vaughn watching from a distance, a look of such tenderness on his face that it made her breath catch. When he realized she'd noticed, he didn't look away, but instead held her gaze steadily, a small smile playing at his lips. Abigail began to read, the familiar words flowing easily as she lost herself in the story and the rapt attention of her audience. This connection, This opportunity to open young minds to the wonders of literature and learning was what she loved most about teaching. It was what she had feared losing in a formal academy setting where the daughters of wealthy families might view education as merely a path to an advantageous marriage. When she finally closed the book an hour later, the children protested enthusiastically. "Just one more chapter, Miss Porter." A young girl named Elena begged. "Tomorrow, perhaps," Abigail replied without thinking, then caught herself. She had made no commitment beyond considering Vaughn's proposal for a month. Yet already she was making promises to these children. As the children dispersed reluctantly, Vaughn approached, offering a hand to help her rise. "You've made quite an impression," he observed, nodding toward David, who was clutching the book and recounting the story to his younger brother. "They're wonderful children," Abigail said sincerely. "Eager to learn, respectful." "They need you," Vaughn said quietly. His hand still held hers, the contact sending a warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "The ranch needs someone like you." Before Abigail could respond, Mrs. Porter appeared beside them, her sharp eyes noting their joined hands. Vaughn released Abigail's fingers immediately, but not before her mother had drawn her own conclusions. "It's getting late," Mrs. Porter announced. "We should return to town before dark." Vaughn nodded. "Of course, I'll have the wagon brought around." As he walked away to make the arrangements, Mrs. Porter gave her daughter a significant look. "He's quite taken with you," she observed. "Mother, please," Abigail protested weakly. "Mr. Blackwood is offering me a teaching position, nothing more." Mrs. Porter's expression was skeptical. "Men like Vaughn Blackwood don't build schoolhouses and living quarters for women they view merely as employees, Abigail." She adjusted her bonnet thoughtfully. "The question is, what are his true intentions? And what exactly happened to bring him to Silver Creek in the first place?" Her mother's questions echoed Abigail's own unvoiced concerns. Vaughn Blackwood remained an enigma, a man of contradictions who had carved out an empire in the wilderness, but spoke Spanish with his workers' children, who commanded respect throughout the county, but deflected questions about his past, who looked at her with undisguised admiration, but maintained a careful distance. "I don't know," Abigail admitted quietly, "but I intend to find out." The ride back to Silver Creek was quieter than the journey out, each member of the party absorbed in their own thoughts. Mr. Porter occasionally commented on some aspect of ranching he had discussed with Vaughn, while Mrs. Porter maintained a watchful silence. Abigail found herself stealing glances at Vaughn's profile as he handled the team, wondering about the man behind the carefully constructed facade. As they approached the town limits, Vaughn finally broke the extended silence. "I hope today has given you something to consider, Miss Porter." "It has," she acknowledged. "Those children deserve an education." "And you deserve a proper school in which to teach them," he replied. "Construction will begin tomorrow, as I promised. Whether you decide to stay or not, those children will have their schoolhouse." The statement surprised her. "You would build it even if I choose to leave," he glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "I keep my promises, Abigail, always." Something in his tone suggested the words held deeper meaning. "But I still hope to convince you to stay." When they reached the Porter home, Vaughn helped them all down from the wagon with practiced courtesy. As her parents headed inside, he held Abigail back with a light touch on her arm. "May I call on you tomorrow evening?" he asked. "There's to be a dance at the town hall. I thought perhaps you might accompany me." A social occasion, a public declaration of whatever was developing between them. Abigail hesitated, aware of what such an appearance would mean in a town like Silver Creek. "People will talk," she said, echoing her words from the day before. Vaughn's smile was warm. "Let them. I have nothing to hide about my admiration for you, Abigail Porter." His directness still took her by surprise. After Jonathan's pretty lies and eventual betrayal, Vaughn's straightforward approach was both refreshing and unnerving. "Very well," she found herself agreeing. "Tomorrow evening." The smile that spread across his face was worth whatever gossip might follow. "Until then," he said, raising her hand briefly to his lips before turning back to his wagon. Abigail watched him drive away, her hand still tingling from the contact. One day into her month in Silver Creek, and already Vaughn Blackwood was making it increasingly difficult to imagine leaving again. Word of Abigail's return and her apparent connection to Vaughn Blackwood spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. By the following morning, callers began arriving at the Porter home, ostensibly to welcome Abigail back, but obviously burning with curiosity about the rumors. Mrs. Holloway from the cafe was first, bringing a pie and thinly veiled questions about that handsome Mr. Blackwood. She was followed by Reverend Peterson's wife, who mentioned that the church would certainly benefit from Abigail's continued presence in the choir. By midday, Abigail had endured 3 more visits, each visitor more transparent than the last in their attempts to uncover the nature of her relationship with the mysterious rancher. "This is exactly why I wanted to leave," Abigail complained to her mother after showing out Mrs. Pembroke, who had barely disguised her probing questions as concern for Abigail's reputation. "Everyone in this town believes they have a right to know every detail of my personal affairs." Mrs. Porter sighed, gathering the teacups left from their latest visitor. "It's the nature of small towns, dear. People care, people meddle," Abigail corrected. "And judge. They also support one another," her mother pointed out gently. "When your father was ill last winter, who brought food for weeks? Who took over his duties at the store? Who prayed with me when we thought we might lose him?" Abigail's irritation softened. Her mother was right, of course. For all its flaws, Silver Creek was a community that pulled together in times of need. It was one of the things she had cherished about the town before Jonathan's betrayal had tainted her perspective. "I just wish they wouldn't assume the worst about my association with Vaughn," she admitted. Mrs. Porter's eyebrows rose at Abigail's use of his first name. "And what exactly is your association with Mr. Blackwood? You've known him properly for all of 2 days." "I'm considering his offer to teach at his ranch school," Abigail replied, deliberately focusing on the professional aspect of their relationship. "And the dance tonight," her mother pressed. "Is that also professional in nature?" Before Abigail could formulate a response, a knock at the door announced yet another visitor. With a sigh, she went to answer it, expecting another curious neighbor. Instead, she found Isabella Vasquez on the porch, a young girl at her side. "Miss Porter," Isabella greeted her warmly. "I hope we are not intruding." "Not at all," Abigail replied, genuinely pleased to see the woman. "Please come in." Isabella introduced the girl as her niece Maria, who had recently arrived from Mexico and spoke very little English. "I thought perhaps you might have some advice for helping her learn," Isabella explained once they were seated in the parlor. "The other children try to teach her, but it is difficult." The request touched Abigail deeply. Here was a genuine need, a reminder of why teaching mattered so much to her. "Of course," she said, smiling at the shy girl. "In fact, I have some books that might help." She retrieved several primers she had used with younger students who were just beginning to read, showing Isabella how the simple texts paired words with pictures. As they discussed teaching methods, Abigail found herself growing animated, her earlier frustration forgotten in the familiar territory of education. "You have a gift," Isabella observed after watching Abigail work with Maria for nearly an hour. "The boss was right about you." Abigail glanced up, curious. "What did Mr. Blackwood say about me?" A knowing smile crossed Isabella's face. "That you are not just a teacher, but someone who changes lives. That the children would love you as he—" She stopped abruptly, then continued more carefully, "as all of us already do." The slip was not lost on Abigail, nor on Mrs. Porter, who had remained quietly observant throughout the visit. What exactly had Vaughn been saying about her to his ranch families? After Isabella and Maria departed with the borrowed books and a promise to return them soon, Mrs. Porter gave her daughter a significant look. "It seems Mr. Blackwood holds you in very high esteem." "So it seems," Abigail agreed, her mind still catching on Isabella's almost revelation. "Perhaps," her mother suggested cautiously, "his interest in establishing a school has as much to do with keeping you in Silver Creek as it does with educating those children." The thought had occurred to Abigail as well. "Would that be so terrible?" she asked softly. "If his motives are partly personal," Mrs. Porter studied her daughter's face carefully. "Not terrible, no. But you should be clear-eyed about what you're walking into, Abigail. Vaughn Blackwood is not Jonathan Wright. He's a man who built an empire from nothing in 3 years. A man who inspires both fear and respect throughout the county. A man with secrets. Everyone has secrets, Mother." "Some secrets are weightier than others," Mrs. Porter replied. "Before you give your heart to this man, and I can see you're already considering it, make sure you know who he truly is." The wisdom in her mother's words was undeniable. For all the attraction Abigail felt toward Vaughn, for all his apparent honesty and his admiration of her, there remained a shroud of mystery around him that she could not ignore. Tonight, she decided. At the dance, she would begin to uncover the truth about Vaughn Blackwood, the man who had taken her hand and changed the course of her life with 2 simple words: "Don't go." The town hall was transformed for the monthly dance, lanterns casting a warm glow over the wooden floor while bunting decorated the walls in festive swags. A small band of local musicians tuned their instruments in the corner as the residents of Silver Creek arrived in their finest attire, eager for an evening of socializing and entertainment. Abigail smoothed the skirt of her emerald green dress, her finest, saved for special occasions, and tried to calm the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Vaughn had arrived precisely at the appointed time, looking devastatingly handsome in a formal black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and trim waist. The appreciative glance he'd given her when she descended the stairs had sent a rush of warmth through her that lingered even now. "You look beautiful," he'd said simply, offering his arm with a gallantry that made her feel like the heroine in a novel. Now, as they entered the town hall together, Abigail was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Vaughn, however, seemed completely unfazed by the attention, his hand steady at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. "Miss Porter," Mayor Hollings greeted them, his wife at his side. "What a pleasant surprise to see you still in town. We had heard you were bound for San Francisco." "My plans have changed, at least temporarily," Abigail replied with a polite smile. "Mr. Blackwood has offered me a teaching position at his ranch school." Mrs. Hollings's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "A ranch school? How unconventional." "Progress often is, Mrs. Hollings," Vaughn replied smoothly. "The children of my workers deserve the same quality education as any in town." The mayor cleared his throat. "Yes, well, very commendable, though we had hoped our own school might benefit from Miss Porter's talents again in the fall. Perhaps arrangements could be made for collaboration between the schools," Vaughn suggested, his tone making it clear this was more than a casual thought. Miss Porter's expertise could benefit children throughout the county. The political implications were not lost on the mayor, who nodded thoughtfully. Abigail marveled at Vaughn's subtle diplomacy, offering a compromise that acknowledged the town's interests while maintaining his own position. As the mayor and his wife moved on to greet other arrivals, Vaughn leaned closer to Abigail. "Shall we dance?" he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. The band had begun a waltz, the lilting melody filling the hall. Abigail hesitated only briefly before nodding. To dance with Vaughn would be to make a public statement about their relationship, whatever that relationship might be. But she found she no longer cared about the town's gossip. He led her onto the floor with confident grace, one hand clasping hers while the other rested lightly at her waist. As they began to move in time to the music, Abigail discovered that Vaughn Blackwood danced as he did everything else with purpose and skill. "You seem surprised," he observed, a smile playing at his lips. "I didn't expect you to be so accomplished at dancing," she admitted. His eyes held a hint of amusement. "There's a great deal you don't know about me yet, Abigail." "Yes," she agreed, seizing the opening. "For instance, where did you learn to dance like this? It's not a skill one typically associates with cattle ranching." A shadow crossed his face, so briefly she might have imagined it. "My mother insisted on dancing lessons. She believed a gentleman should know how to move properly in society." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Abigail ventured, hoping to draw him out further. "She was," he replied, the past tense confirming what Abigail had suspected. "She died many years ago." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "And your father," Vaughn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, "also gone." He guided her through a turn, his movements never faltering despite the personal nature of their conversation. "What else would you like to know, Abigail? I can see the questions in your eyes." His directness took her by surprise yet again. "Where were you before Silver Creek?" she asked, deciding that forthrightness deserved the same in return. "St. Louis mostly," he replied. "Before that, Chicago. Before that, Boston." "You've traveled extensively, necessity rather than choice," he said cryptically. Before she could press further, the music ended, and polite applause filled the hall. Vaughn released her waist but retained her hand, tucking it into the crook of his arm as he led her toward the refreshment table. Their progress was interrupted by the approach of a familiar figure, Jonathan Wright, mercifully sober this time, but no less unwelcome. He had Caroline Montgomery on his arm, the banker's daughter looking uncomfortably caught between embarrassment and defiance. "Abigail," Jonathan greeted her with forced politeness. "Blackwood." Vaughn's posture stiffened slightly, but his voice remained civil. "Right. Miss Montgomery." An awkward silence descended, broken finally by Caroline. "We were surprised to hear you decided to stay in Silver Creek, Miss Porter. Father had heard you accepted a position in San Francisco." "Plans change," Abigail replied evenly. Jonathan's gaze flicked between Abigail and Vaughn, a hint of jealousy darkening his features. "Quite a rapid change." One might wonder what was so persuasive. The implication in his tone made Abigail's cheeks flush with anger. Before she could respond, Vaughn spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "I think we've established that your opinions on Miss Porter's decisions are neither wanted nor valued, right?" The words were polite, but the steel beneath them was unmistakable. "If you'll excuse us." He guided Abigail away, his hand steady at her elbow. When they reached a quieter corner of the hall, he turned to face her, genuine concern in his eyes. "I apologize for that," he said. "Wright seems determined to cause you discomfort." "It's not your fault," Abigail assured him, touched by his protectiveness. "Jonathan has always had a talent for saying exactly the wrong thing at the wrong time." Vaughn's expression darkened. "Men like that rarely change." He shook his head slightly, as if dispelling an unpleasant memory. "Would you like to continue our dance, or would you prefer some air? The evening is mild." The offer of escape was tempting. Despite her determination to enjoy the evening, the encounter with Jonathan had left Abigail feeling unsettled. Some air would be lovely, she decided. Vaughn offered his arm again, leading her toward the side doors that opened onto a small garden area beside the town hall. A few lanterns illuminated the space, casting a gentle glow over benches and flowering shrubs. Several couples had already sought the relative privacy of the garden, but Vaughn found them an unoccupied bench beneath a flowering apple tree. As they sat, Abigail was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the clean scent of his shaving soap, the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. For a moment, neither spoke, the sounds of the dance muted by distance and the gentle rustling of leaves above them. "You were asking about my past," Vaughn finally said, breaking the silence. "Why?" Abigail turned to face him, determined to be honest. "Because you're a mystery, Vaughn Blackwood. You arrived in Silver Creek 3 years ago with no connections, no history that anyone knew. You built a ranching empire practically overnight. You speak like an educated man, dance like someone trained in the finest ballrooms, yet live on the frontier and seem completely at ease among cowboys and cattle." A small smile played at his lips. "And this bothers you?" "It intrigues me," she corrected. "But it also concerns me. My mother believes," she hesitated, then continued more carefully. "My mother suggests I should know more about the man who seems determined to keep me in Silver Creek." Vaughn was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains barely visible in the moonlight. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "I was born Vaughn Blackwood Astor, son of William and Eleanor Astor of Boston. My father was a shipping magnate with interests in railroads, banking, and land development. I was educated at Harvard, groomed to take over the family empire." He paused, his profile stark against the night sky. "And then I lost everything." Abigail's breath caught at the revelation. "The Astors were one of the wealthiest families in America, a dynasty of power and influence." "What happened?" she asked softly. "My father made enemies," Vaughn continued, his voice carefully controlled. "Powerful ones. When I was 25, he was murdered, though it was made to look like an accident. My mother died 6 months later, of grief I believe more than any physical ailment." His hands clasped together tightly. "I tried to continue his work, to fight the men who had destroyed him. Instead, I found myself framed for financial improprieties, my reputation destroyed, my father's empire dismantled and absorbed by his enemies." The pain in his voice was palpable, a wound still raw despite the passing years. Abigail reached out instinctively, covering his clasped hands with her own. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, his fingers unclenched, one hand turning to capture hers. "I left Boston with what little I could salvage, determined to rebuild somewhere my family name wouldn't be a liability. I dropped Astor and became simply Vaughn Blackwood. I worked my way west, learning each new business as I went, banking in Chicago, livestock trading in St. Louis." A grim smile crossed his face. "I made new enemies along the way, men who discovered my true identity and thought to use it against me." "Is that why you came to Silver Creek?" Abigail asked. "To escape them," Vaughn nodded. "And to start again, somewhere remote enough that my past wouldn't follow easily. I bought the old Hollister place with the last of my capital and threw myself into building something new, something honest." His eyes found hers in the dim light. "For 3 years I've lived with one foot always ready to run, always watching for signs that my past had caught up with me." "And has it?" she asked, suddenly fearful for him. "No," he said with certainty. "Silver Creek is far from the corridors of power where my enemies move. Here, a man is judged by his actions, not his name or his history." He squeezed her hand gently. "Here I found something I never expected to find again." "What?" Abigail whispered, though something in his eyes already told her the answer. "Peace," he said, "and the possibility of happiness." His gaze held her steadily. "When I saw you at that train platform about to leave, I realized I couldn't let you go without at least trying to give you a reason to stay. Not just for the children who need a teacher, but for me. Because in 2 years of watching you from afar, Abigail Porter, I've come to admire everything about you, your courage, your intelligence, your compassion." The confession left Abigail breathless. No man had ever spoken to her with such honesty, such vulnerability. Jonathan's courtship had been all flattery and pretty words, hollow at the core. Vaughn's plain speaking, the raw truth of his past, the simple declaration of his feelings, these had a weight and substance that touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said finally, "for trusting me with your story." "I've told no one else," he admitted. "Not even Miguel knows the full truth of who I was." The significance of his confidence was not lost on her. "Your secret is safe with me," she promised. Vaughn's expression softened, relief and something warmer mingling in his gaze. "I think perhaps we should return to the dance," he suggested, though he made no move to release her hand. "Before your mother sends out a search party." Abigail smiled, reluctant to break the intimate moment but aware of the proprieties. "Yes, I suppose we should." As they rose from the bench, Vaughn paused, still holding her hand. "Abigail," he said, his voice low and serious, "I've been honest with you about my past. Now I want to be honest about my hopes for the future. I'm building that schoolhouse for those children, yes. But I'm also building it for you to give you a reason to stay in Silver Creek, to stay near me." His dark eyes searched hers. "I don't expect any promises now, just the chance to show you day by day that there's a place for you here, with me." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. In that moment, with the moonlight filtering through apple blossoms above them and the distant music of the dance floating on the night air, Abigail found herself reconsidering everything she had planned for her future. San Francisco seemed suddenly distant and unimportant compared to the possibilities before her in Silver Creek, teaching eager children, building something meaningful, and perhaps finding a love more genuine than she had ever dared hope for. "I can't promise I'll stay beyond the month we agreed upon," she said carefully, "but I can promise to consider it with an open heart." The smile that spread across Vaughn's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm, radiant, full of promise. "That's all I ask," he said, and offered his arm to escort her back to the dance. As they walked, Abigail realized that for the first time since Jonathan's betrayal, she was looking forward rather than back, and the future suddenly seemed filled with possibilities she had never imagined. The weeks that followed the dance passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Vaughn began construction on the schoolhouse immediately. Abigail visited the site every few days, marveling at the rapid progress. Teams of men worked from dawn to dusk, the skeleton of the building taking shape against the backdrop of mountains and sky. "It's magnificent," she told Vaughn during one such visit, as they stood together watching the roof beams being raised. "Far grander than I expected." "Nothing but the best for our teacher," he replied with a smile that warmed her from within. "Our teacher." The simple phrase carried a weight of meaning that Abigail found herself embracing more each day. The children from the ranch visited her regularly in town, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, an interestingly shaped stone, a drawing made with precious pencils, and questions about when their lessons would begin. "Soon," she promised them, her heart already committed though her mind still harbored doubts about abandoning her San Francisco plans entirely. In the evenings, Vaughn often called at the Porter home, sometimes to discuss details of the school but increasingly just to spend time with Abigail. They would sit on the front porch as twilight deepened, talking about books they had read, places they had seen, hopes for the future. With each conversation, each shared confidence, Abigail felt herself drawing closer to this complex man who had revealed his true self to her alone. 3 weeks after the dance, the schoolhouse was completed, a testament to Vaughn's determination and resources. The building stood proudly on its hill, white clapboard gleaming in the sun, large windows promising light and air for young learners. Inside, desks had been arranged in neat rows, a teacher's desk positioned at the front. Bookshelves lined one wall, already partially filled with volumes Vaughn had ordered from Denver. "It's perfect," Abigail breathed as he gave her the formal tour. The adjacent living quarters were equally impressive: a sitting room with a stone fireplace, a small but functional kitchen, a bedroom with a view of the mountains, and even a tiny study where she could prepare lessons and grade papers. "You like it?" Vaughn asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that she found endearing from such a typically confident man. "It's more than I ever dreamed," she admitted, running her hand along the smooth surface of the desk. "Any teacher would be fortunate to work in such surroundings." "Not any teacher," he corrected gently. "You, Abigail, this was built for you." The intensity in his gaze made her heart race. Over the past weeks, their relationship had developed a depth and intimacy that went far beyond friendship. Though Vaughn had been scrupulously respectful of her reputation, never overstepping the bounds of propriety. But in moments like this, alone together in the space he had created for her, Abigail felt the powerful current of attraction between them. "Vaughn," she began, not entirely sure what she meant to say. Before she could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment. Vaughn moved to the window, his expression shifting from tender to concerned as he recognized the riders. "Sheriff Tanner," he murmured. "And Jonathan Wright. What could they want?" Abigail felt a chill of apprehension. She joined Vaughn at the window, watching as the two men dismounted and approached the schoolhouse. "Stay here," Vaughn said, his voice suddenly hard. "I'll speak with them." "No," Abigail countered, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll speak with them together." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and they moved to the schoolhouse entrance together. Vaughn opened the door just as Sheriff Tanner raised his hand to knock. "Blackwood," the sheriff greeted him, his expression grim. "Miss Porter." "Sheriff," Vaughn replied evenly. "Right. What brings you out this way?" Jonathan stood slightly behind the sheriff, a smug expression on his face that immediately put Abigail on edge. "Got some questions need answering," Sheriff Tanner said, his weathered face betraying nothing of his thoughts. "Mind if we come in?" Vaughn stepped back, allowing the men to enter the schoolhouse. "What's this about, Sheriff?" Tanner removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture Abigail recognized as discomfort. "Received a telegram this morning from St. Louis," he said finally. "Seems someone there is mighty interested in finding a man matching your description. Goes by the name Astor." Abigail felt Vaughn stiffen beside her, though his face remained impassive. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice betraying nothing. "Said this Astor fellow is wanted for questioning in connection with some financial irregularities," the sheriff continued. "Substantial sums of money gone missing." Jonathan's smirk widened. "I knew there was something not right about you, Blackwood, or should I say Astor?" Vaughn's gaze shifted to Jonathan, cold and assessing. "And how exactly did these inquiries from St. Louis find their way to Silver Creek, right? Seems an unlikely coincidence." Jonathan shifted uncomfortably under Vaughn's steady gaze. "Caroline's father has banking connections. He mentioned your name once in correspondence, and his associate was very interested." "I see," Vaughn said quietly. The implications were clear. Jonathan, still smarting from his public humiliation, had found a way to strike back. Sheriff Tanner cleared his throat. "I'm not here to make accusations, Vaughn. Known you 3 years, never had cause to doubt your character. But I've got to ask, is there any truth to these claims?" Abigail's heart pounded as she watched Vaughn's face. The secret he had shared with her alone was now threatening to unravel his carefully built life. "My name was once Vaughn Blackwood Astor," he acknowledged after a moment, his voice steady. "I changed it legally before coming west. As for the financial irregularities, those were accusations made by men who destroyed my father and stole his company. False accusations that I fought and disproved, though the damage to my reputation was already done." Sheriff Tanner nodded slowly. "Got any proof of that?" "In my safe at the main house," Vaughn replied. Court documents clearing my name. I keep them as insurance against exactly this type of situation. Jonathan's triumphant expression faltered. He's lying. Why would an innocent man change his name and hide out here? I'm not hiding, right? Vaughn said coldly. I'm building. There's a difference. Sheriff, Abigail interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. Mr. Blackwood has been nothing but an asset to this community. This schoolhouse alone represents a significant investment in Silver Creek's future. I don't disagree, Miss Porter, Tanner replied kindly, but I've got to follow through on official inquiries. He turned back to Vaughn. If you'd be willing to show me those documents, I expect that would clear things up. Of course, Vaughn agreed. They're at the house. As the men prepared to leave, Jonathan lingered, his gaze shifting to Abigail with a mixture of spite and satisfaction. Not such a fine catch after all, is he? A man running from his past, living under a false name. Get out, Abigail said quietly, anger building within her. You did this deliberately out of petty jealousy. Jonathan shrugged, unrepentant. Just thought you should know who you're really dealing with. Unlike some, I actually care about your welfare. My welfare, Abigail repeated incredulously. You humiliated me, Jonathan. You betrayed me weeks before our wedding. And now you claim concern for my welfare, Abigail, he began, taking a step toward her. Miss Porter to you, she interrupted, her voice like ice. And I suggest you leave before Mr. Blackwood returns. He showed remarkable restraint when you insulted me publicly. I doubt he'll be as forgiving if you continue to harass me on his property. Something in her tone, a confidence and authority she had never displayed during their engagement, made Jonathan step back. With a final scowl, he turned and left the schoolhouse, following the sheriff who was already halfway to the main house. Alone in the suddenly quiet building, Abigail sank onto one of the student benches, her mind racing. Would this destroy everything Vaughn had built? Would the life he had carefully constructed in Silver Creek unravel because of Jonathan's vindictiveness? More personally, she wondered what this meant for her own decision. The month Vaughn had asked for was nearly over. She had been leaning strongly toward staying, drawn by the children's needs, the beautiful school, and most powerfully, her growing feelings for Vaughn himself. But if he were forced to leave Silver Creek, what then? One thing was certain: she would not abandon him to face this alone. Whatever Jonathan and his allies hoped to accomplish with this attack, they had underestimated both Vaughn Blackwood's resilience and Abigail Porter's loyalty. Rising from the bench with renewed determination, Abigail left the schoolhouse and headed toward the main ranch house. She had chosen to stand by Vaughn's side when facing the sheriff. She would do the same now as he confronted this threat from his past. When Abigail reached the main house, she found Vaughn and Sheriff Tanner in the study, documents spread across a large desk. Jonathan was nowhere to be seen, much to her relief. Miss Porter, the sheriff greeted her with a nod. Mr. Blackwood has been explaining his situation. Quite a story. And entirely true, Vaughn added, his expression softening as he met Abigail's gaze. As these documents prove. Sheriff Tanner gathered the papers, handling them with careful respect. Court ruling clearing you of all charges. Legal name change. Proof of legitimate purchase of the Hollister property. He shook his head slowly. Seems to me some folks back east have a personal vendetta against you, son. They destroyed my father, Vaughn said quietly. I refuse to let them destroy me as well. The sheriff returned the documents. Far as I'm concerned, this matter is closed. You're Vaughn Blackwood legally, and you've been a credit to this county since you arrived. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll send a reply to that telegram, stating that their information was mistaken. Relief washed over Abigail. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me for doing what's right, Tanner replied gruffly. Though I'd be careful if I were you, Blackwood. Wright's not the type to let things go easily, and now he knows your business. I can handle Jonathan Wright, Vaughn assured him. After the sheriff departed, silence fell between Abigail and Vaughn. He stood by the window, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he finally said, not turning to face her. "This is exactly what I feared my past reaching out to disrupt the life I've built here. To hurt those I care about." Abigail moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body but not quite touching. "You have nothing to apologize for," she said firmly. "Jonathan did this out of spite, nothing more." Vaughn finally turned to her, his expression troubled. "Perhaps, but it changes things, doesn't it? Now everyone will know who I was. The questions will start. The suspicions." "Let them question," Abigail replied, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Let them suspect. You've proven your worth to this community 100 times over. This schoolhouse alone," she gestured toward the window, where the white building was visible on its hill. "A building isn't enough to erase doubt," he said grimly. "I've seen how these things spread. Today it's questions about my name. Tomorrow it will be whispers about my character, my intentions." His gaze held hers, pained but resolute. "I won't let that touch you, Abigail. Your reputation in this town is too important." Understanding dawned cold and sharp. "You're pushing me away," she realized. "After everything, after asking me to stay, after building that school you're giving up because of Jonathan Wright's petty revenge." "I'm protecting you," Vaughn corrected, his voice tight with emotion. "The last thing I want is for you to be caught in the crossfire of my past." Anger flared in Abigail's chest, hot and unexpected. "I don't need your protection, Vaughn Blackwood. I need your trust. I need you to believe that I'm strong enough to stand beside you, whatever comes." He stared at her, clearly taken aback by her passionate response. "Abigail, no," she interrupted, stepping closer to him. "Listen to me. For 2 years I taught in a town that barely valued education. I endured Jonathan's betrayal with my head held high. I was prepared to travel alone across the country to build a new life. I am not some fragile flower that will wilt at the first sign of difficulty." Vaughn's expression softened, a hint of admiration replacing the concern in his eyes. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're certainly not that." "Then don't insult me by trying to make my decisions for me," she continued, her voice steadier now. "If you want me to leave Silver Creek because you no longer wish for my company, tell me so directly. But if you're pushing me away because you think it's for my own good, then you don't know me as well as I thought you did." For a long moment, Vaughn simply looked at her, something shifting in his gaze, respect, wonder, and beneath it all, a tenderness that made her heart race. "You're remarkable," he finally said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "And you're right. I was making the same mistake my father made with my mother, trying to shield her from difficulties rather than trusting her strength." His hand lingered near her cheek. "I won't make that mistake again." Relief washed through Abigail. "Good," she said simply. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "So what happens now, Miss Porter? Your month is nearly over. San Francisco still awaits." Abigail took a deep breath, the decision that had been forming in her heart for weeks now crystallizing into certainty. "San Francisco will have to find another teacher," she said. "I'm needed here." The smile that spread across Vaughn's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Are you certain? I don't want you to stay out of obligation or pity. I'm staying because there are children here who need me," Abigail interrupted. "I'm staying because I've built a life in this community, imperfect as it may be." She met his gaze steadily. "And I'm staying because there's a man here who took my hand at a train station and gave me a reason to believe in second chances." Vaughn's hands framed her face, his touch gentle but firm. "Abigail Porter," he said, his voice low and intense. "From the moment I saw you teaching those children on your first day in Silver Creek, something in me recognized something in you. It took me 2 years to find the courage to act on that feeling. I won't waste another day." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tender at first, a question more than a demand. Abigail answered by winding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened into something more passionate, more certain. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not just for a month or a year. Stay with me for a lifetime." The proposal was unorthodox, no bended knee, no ring, just the raw honesty that had characterized their relationship from the start. And it was perfect. "Yes," Abigail replied simply. "I'll stay." The news of Abigail Porter's engagement to Vaughn Blackwood spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, eliciting reactions ranging from delight to consternation. The revelation of Vaughn's true identity and the documents proving his innocence of any wrongdoing became secondary to the romantic tale of the schoolteacher who had almost left and the rancher who had stopped her at the last moment. "It's like something from a novel, Mrs. Holloway declared as she served coffee to her morning customers at the cafe, taking her hand right there on the train platform and saying, "Don't go. If that isn't the most romantic thing I ever heard." The wedding was set for the following spring, giving Abigail time to establish her school and Vaughn time to complete the additions he insisted on making to the ranch house for his bride. In the meantime, Abigail took up residence in the teachers' quarters attached to the schoolhouse, with Isabella Vasquez serving as a companion to ensure propriety was maintained. The school opened with 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 16, each eager to learn and grateful for the opportunity Abigail and Vaughn had provided. On the first day, as Abigail stood before her class in the bright, airy room filled with new books and supplies, she felt a sense of rightness that confirmed her decision to stay. "Today," she told the children, "we begin a journey together, a journey of learning, of discovery, of possibility." From the doorway where he had paused to watch, Vaughn caught her eye and smiled, a private acknowledgement of their own journey, just beginning. The months passed in a rhythm of work and courtship. Each evening after school, Vaughn would escort Abigail on walks around the ranch, discussing the day's events and planning for their future together. On Sundays, they attended church in town, their presence together gradually becoming accepted and even celebrated by most of the community. Jonathan Wright and Caroline Montgomery left Silver Creek in November, bound for Denver where the banker's daughter had relatives. Their departure removed the last shadow from Abigail's happiness, though she found she could now think of Jonathan with pity rather than pain. He had never known what true partnership could be, the kind she was discovering with Vaughn. Winter arrived with heavy snows that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland. The schoolhouse, with its large windows and efficient stove, remained a warm haven for learning. On the coldest days, Vaughn insisted on escorting Abigail himself from her quarters to the classroom, though it was only a short walk. "You don't need to worry," she told him one morning as he brushed snow from her cloak. "I'm perfectly capable of walking through a little snow." "I know you're capable," he replied with a smile. "But I enjoy taking care of you, Abigail. It gives me pleasure to know you're safe and warm." It was these small moments of tenderness, rather than grand gestures, that continually deepened Abigail's love for him. Vaughn Blackwood might be a powerful rancher with a complicated past, but he was also a man who noticed when she was tired and brought her tea, who remembered which books she loved and found rare copies for her library, who listened to her ideas about education with genuine interest and respect. As spring approached, and with it their wedding day, Abigail found herself reflecting on the remarkable turn her life had taken. Had she boarded that train as planned, she would now be teaching wealthy girls in San Francisco, perhaps finding satisfaction in her work, but missing the deep connection to community and land that she had discovered at Blackwood Ranch. and she would never have known the profound joy of loving and being loved by Vaughn. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, the kind of perfect spring morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. The ceremony was held in the Silver Creek Church, filled to capacity with townspeople and ranch workers alike. Abigail's students had decorated the sanctuary with wildflowers gathered from the hills, and Miguel Vasquez's oldest son played the violin as Abigail walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Vaughn waited at the altar, his usually composed face alight with wonder as he watched his bride approach. When Mr. Porter placed Abigail's hand in Vaughn's, the moment echoed that first encounter at the train station. A hand extended, a choice offered, a future changed. Dearly beloved, Reverend Peterson began, his voice carrying through the hushed church. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The traditional words washed over Abigail as she stood facing Vaughn, his dark eyes never leaving hers. When it came time for their vows, he spoke with the straightforward honesty that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Abigail Porter, he said, his voice steady and clear, I take you as my wife, pledging to love and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health. I promise to cherish your strength, respect your wisdom, and support your dreams. His voice softened, meant only for her ears. And I promise never to forget how close I came to losing you before I'd even found you. Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as she spoke her own vows, her voice wavering slightly with emotion, but gaining strength with each word. Vaughn Blackwood, I take you as my husband, pledging to love and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes with courage and faith. She squeezed his hands gently. And I promise to be forever grateful that you took my hand that day and said, don't go. The exchange of rings, the pronouncement of marriage, the first kiss as husband and wife all passed in a blur of joy and solemnity. As they turned to face their friends and family as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Abigail felt a sense of completion, of having found her true place in the world. The celebration that followed at Blackwood Ranch was unlike anything Silver Creek had seen before. Tables were set up under the great oak tree where Abigail had first read to the children. Musicians played while couples danced on a wooden floor constructed for the occasion. Food and drink flowed freely, Vaughn having spared no expense to ensure every guest was well fed and entertained. As evening fell and lanterns were lit throughout the ranch yard, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Vaughn led Abigail away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. Happy, Mrs. Blackwood? He asked, his arm around her waist. More than I ever imagined possible, she replied, leaning into his embrace. And you? I have everything I could ever want, he said simply. A home, a purpose, and now, a wife who is everything I admired from afar and so much more than I dared hope for up close. Abigail turned in his arms to face him. When I think of how close I came to leaving, but you didn't, he interrupted gently. You stayed, and everything else, the school, our marriage, this celebration grew from that one decision. From your courage in stopping me, she corrected. In taking my hand and asking me not to go. Vaughn smiled, drawing her closer. The best risk I ever took, he murmured against her hair, and one I would take again 1,000 times over. As they stood together under the star-filled sky, the sounds of celebration drifting up from below, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that missing that train had been the most fortunate accident of her life. The journey she had begun instead with this man, in this place, promised to be far more fulfilling than any she could have imagined. The school teacher who had nearly left and the cowboy who had stopped her had found in each other not just love, but a shared vision of what life could be when two people committed to building something meaningful together. And as Vaughn lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that held both promise and passion, Abigail silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought them to that train platform on that fateful morning when everything changed with two simple words: "Don't go." 5 years later, Abigail stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Vaughn taught their 3-year-old son, William, to sit properly on his first pony. The boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of ranch life: horses nickering, cattle lowing in the distance, workers calling to one another as they went about their tasks. "Not too fast," she called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child grew. The doctor had confirmed just yesterday that all was proceeding well with this pregnancy, easier than her first had been. Vaughn looked up with a grin that still made her heart skip. "He's a natural, just like his mother." "His mother prefers books to horses," Abigail reminded him with a smile. "And yet she rides better than half my ranch hands," Vaughn countered, leading the pony in a careful circle with William clutching the saddle horn, his small face alight with excitement. It was true over the years. Abigail had embraced ranch life with the same determination she brought to everything. She had learned to ride properly, to help with calving when needed, even to shoot with reasonable accuracy after Vaughn insisted she know how to protect herself during the rare occasions he had to travel. In return, Vaughn had embraced her world of books and ideas, often joining her evening classes for adults that had become a popular addition to the school's offerings. Together, they had expanded the original schoolhouse twice to accommodate the growing number of students, as neighboring ranches began sending their children once word spread of the quality of education available. The Blackwood Ranch School, as it was now known, had 6 teachers besides Abigail herself, who served as headmistress while continuing to teach the advanced students. The reputation of the school had grown throughout the territory, with several graduates now attending universities in the East, their tuition quietly provided by Vaughn, who believed talent should never be limited by finances. The ranch itself had prospered beyond even Vaughn's ambitious plans. His breeding programs had produced cattle particularly well suited to the Colorado climate, and his business acumen had expanded their operations to include investments in mining, timber, and a small but growing railroad that connected previously isolated communities to larger markets. But for all their public success, it was their private happiness that Abigail treasured most. The partnership they had forged was stronger than she could have imagined on that long-ago wedding day. They had weathered challenges together: a devastating winter storm that threatened their herds, a fire that destroyed part of the original ranch house, even a brief return of the enemies from Vaughn's past who had attempted to discredit him in Denver business circles. Through it all, they had stood side by side, each lending strength to the other when needed. And in the quiet moments reading together by the fire, walking at sunset among the aspens, watching their son discover the world they had built a life rich with meaning and joy. "Mama, look," William called, sitting straighter in the saddle as Vaughn led the pony toward the porch. "I'm riding." "I see, my brave boy," Abigail replied, her heart full as she watched her husband and son together, Vaughn's dark head bent protectively over William's lighter one, the same determined set to both their jaws. Later that evening, after William had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Abigail and Vaughn sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. These quiet moments together at day's end had become a cherished ritual, a time to share thoughts and plans, or sometimes simply to enjoy each other's presence in comfortable silence. "I had a letter from David Vasquez today," Abigail said, referring to their first student who was now in his second year of medical studies in Boston. He's at the top of his class. Vaughn nodded with satisfaction. Miguel and Isabella must be bursting with pride. They are. And grateful to you for making it possible. He shook his head slightly. I only provided the opportunity. David did the work with your teaching as his foundation. Abigail smiled, acknowledging the truth in his words. It's remarkable to think of how much has changed in 5 years. When I consider how close I came to leaving all this behind, don't, Vaughn interrupted gently, taking her hand. We've had this conversation 100 times, my love. You didn't leave. That's what matters. She squeezed his fingers, still marveling sometimes at how perfectly their hands fit together. I was thinking today about that moment at the train station. You never did tell me exactly what made you decide to come after me that day. Vaughn was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. Fear, he finally said. Not of being alone, I'd been alone for years, but of watching you leave and knowing I'd missed the chance to discover if what I felt for you from afar might grow into something real. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the first stars appearing above. It was the first truly impulsive thing I'd done since coming to Silver Creek. And yet it changed everything, Abigail observed. For the better, he agreed, leaning over to kiss her softly. Every day for the better. As his lips met hers, Abigail felt the same flutter of joy that his kisses had always evoked, undiminished by years of marriage. When they parted, she rested her head against his shoulder, his arm coming around her as naturally as breathing. In the distance, a train whistle sounded the evening express passing through Silver Creek on its way west. Once, that sound had represented escape, a future elsewhere, the promise of something different. Now, it was simply part of the tapestry of sounds that made up home. Abigail Porter Blackwood, who had once stood on a station platform with a ticket to San Francisco clutched in her hand, silently thanked the man beside her for having the courage to take that hand and say the words that had changed both their lives forever. Don't go. She hadn't gone. And in staying, she had found everything she hadn't known. She was seeking purpose, community, family, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. The school teacher and the cowboy, building a life together in the shadow of the mountains, writing their own story one day at a time. It was, Abigail thought as Vaughn's hand came to rest protectively over hers on her rounded belly, the finest story she could imagine being part of. And like all the best stories, theirs was still being written, with chapters yet to unfold and adventures yet to be shared. But the beginning, that moment of decision on a train platform when a cowboy took her hand and said, "Don't go," would always remain the turning point, the instant when everything changed, when the future realigned itself into something neither of them could have predicted, but both now treasured beyond measure. And as the stars continued to emerge in the vast Colorado sky, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice, not just for the children she taught, or the community she served, or even for the family she and Vaughn had created together, but for herself. For the woman who had once been ready to run from heartbreak and had instead found the courage to stay and build something far more meaningful than escape could ever have offered. "I love you," she whispered, the words simple but carrying the weight of all they had become to each other. "And I love you," Vaughn replied, his voice deep and certain in the gathering darkness. "Always." In the end, that was all that mattered, not the paths not taken or the journeys postponed, but the life they had chosen to create together, one day at a time, in this place that had become the center of their world. A life that had begun with a missed train and 2 words that had changed everything. Don't go.